Guess who's back? Welcome to another one of my hip hop album ranking videos. Today we're going to be looking at Mr. Eminem, you lucky people. Now, of course, Eminem is not only one of the biggest names in hip hop history, in music history as well, particularly recent history. Very much a household name in all of music now. Has been releasing music for the past couple of decades, since the late 90s, and obviously has got a very interesting catalogue to go through. There's certainly albums that polarize people, and we will certainly be covering them. And so we have 10 studio albums in total to go through. I'm not including Infinite, so I do not see it as a studio album, as more of a demo album, an underground release. So I'm not including that in this list, but all the Aftermath releases will certainly, solo Aftermath releases will certainly be included on here. And so we start off with number 10, one of those polarizing albums, Encore. Now, I do feel sort of sorry placing Encore at the bottom. It is a bit of an obvious choice, and obviously, if you look into the making of it, being released in November 2004, as Eminem was starting to get quite heavy into his drug use. There were songs from this album's recording process which leaked, which necessitated the album to be certain tracks to be recorded again in order to make the release. So there was a bit of a rushed job. So the fact that it was a bit of a botchy creation does make me feel a bit sorry for placing it so low down. And it's not like he didn't have things to say at this time. There's the argument that the album was rushed out and it should have been saved for a later time to be released. But there's definitely content on here, particularly in the first third of the album. We get tracks like Yellow Brick Road, discussing the racist tapes which have been leaked around that time, discussing his upbringing at the time, getting into hip hop music, being a white person, with largely black people enjoying the music, and just going into some of the events which led up to said tapes, and subsequently apologising for them. It had been released when he was very young and immature. Of course, it being Eminem, the apology is sort of backhanded. The final line being, "No matter what colour a girl is, she's still a hoe," I believe the cut word is supposed to be. But apart from that, it is a good storytelling track, going further into his background a bit, like Toy Soldiers, discussing the beefs he was involved in at the time, and how he doesn't want them to affect any of the people that he works with, any of his soldiers. It featured the now infamous video with proof showing Proof being shot as a result of one of these beefs, and 18 months later roughly, Proof would end up being shot, not because of one of Eminem's beefs, but it's still a bit of a haunting visual nonetheless. But the song itself is still very powerful. Mosh, discussing the Bush administration, which he wasn't a fan of. Very timely as it came around the time of the presidential election. Bush ended up winning that second term, but the sentiment is still the same. It still works for it. Even before then, Evil Deeds is a decent opener, followed by Never Enough with Nate Dogg and 50 Cent, a nice sort of pacey, dancey almost Dr. Dre beat. 50 has one of his better verses on here, and Nate Dogg always has a good chorus. So the entire first third of the album is pretty stellar, actually. Then we get into some of the less favourable tracks. Puke, about his relationship with Kim, in a way, but just continually the whole I hate my wife, and by this point it really had gotten a bit too heavy-handed, particularly considering he does have some more positive things to say about her later on in the album. And in fact got remarried to her briefly just after the album, I believe it was. My first single is an immature take on a first single. Rain Man, Big Weenie, Just Lose It is it makes sense as a single, kind of going in for the more comedic style of lead singles such as Without Me, Wilson Shady, My Name Is, with some topical references to Michael Jackson and other things, but it's just not a particularly strong single overall. Us Like That, an excuse to mention female celebrities. After this, we start to pick up a bit more again. So the third of the album is better. Spend some time, a nice gentle kind of song, which is a very different style that we usually get from Eminem, featuring 50 Cent, Obi Trice and Stat Quo. Whether 50 Cent was necessarily needed again for this track, considering he is going to pop up later as well, make a total of 3 appearances, but still it's nice to sort of establish the Shady roster. Mockingbird, which goes looking to his relationship with his daughters and to an extent his wife, growing up, and how they didn't have a lot to be able to provide with, and that kind of thing. A nice sentimental song. Crazy in Love, which is a very nice pacey track, a sort of a love song without being too heavy-handed, as some of M's love songs can be, either being just too aggressive in nature or too unpleasant in nature, because M can't really do a nice love song. But this is good for what it is. It's nice and catchy. Nothing in it is particularly bad or anything like that. So very good song. One Shot Two Shot with D12. A sort of storytelling track about gunfire at theatre, which kind of plays in with the encore theme. Then closing out with the title track, Encore, with Dr. Dre and 50 Cent again. Again, 50 Cent just appears for a few bars and then disappears again. This is more for the back and forth chemistry between Dr. Dre and Eminem, which is strong as ever. So it makes for a good closer. It then finishes with Eminem shooting the audience because, of course, it does. Um, yeah, it's mainly just the middle third of the album that really drags it down, and yeah, it's really because of some of the stuff that's in there that this album is so far down. If that bit wasn't in there, it would be yeah a stronger album overall. Because you say the 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 chapters that sort of surrounds that middle third are good overall, but yeah, unfortunately, there's only so high I can put an album with Rain Man and Big Weenie and my first single on. So yeah. At number 9 we have Revival, a similarly polarizing album, released in December 2007 after a bit of a break in between releases. I think the main issue with this album, in a bit of a similar way to Encore's, it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. There's sort of a sense of becoming more of a mature and serious Eminem project overall. But there are a few tracks on there which kind of detract from that as sort of a way of M not being able to kind of fully embrace, or feeling that his audience would fully embrace a completely serious album, which to an extent he was correct about, but at the same time, audiences do kind of have to mature with the artist, particularly if you've been a fan since the very beginning. Obviously, there are people who would come on to the newer stuff not being aware of the older material, and I can understand wanting to bring some of that older style on here to make people more familiar with that, but it doesn't quite work on this album. Except for Framed, which is a decent enough horrorcore track, or in that kind of vein anyway. Although if it was, maybe if it was the only one of those songs which doesn't try to go in the same vein as some of the other tracks, it would work. But there was probably also places where it could have fit a bit better, which we'll get onto. The tracks which don't work so well, Chloroseptic, Heat, Offended. It's kind of all these Offended trying to get into the the more repulsive side of Eminem's lyrics, but there's nothing on there which is that. It's all fairly tame and by extent kind of pointless. Apart from that, most of the things on here aren't that bad overall. So this is why it gets taken higher overall than Encore, because it's more, because stronger overall tracks on here. Walk on Water, featuring Beyonce, a polarizing track, but I quite enjoy it. Yes, it does kind of look at some of the same themes of writer's block and artistic issues that Emma's looked at before, and it's probably a bit of a weird opening track as well. But I still think it's a strong enough song overall. Believe is a good follow-up track. Chloroseptic, we've already discussed. Untouchable, looking at police brutality, which maybe is done as a slightly ham-fisted way, but at least M is showing his willingness to tackle the subject. River with Ed Sheeran, again one of the more mainstream orientated songs, one of detractions from this album was the amount of pop artists that appear on here. But Eminem and Ed Sheeran do have good chemistry together. They, kind of, yeah, even though it's like just like the chorus that Ed appears on, they feel natural together. The song works. It sounds like an older M style song from kind of like the early mid 2000s time. Um, so yeah, it's a good song overall, and again, it's a love song of M's of sorts that does try and fit a few newer elements, looking at issues of affairs and abortions. So from that aspect, it's good again to get M trying to tackle some different things. Um, the Remind Me intro Dr. Dre decided to produce because there's the only contribution he can make on the album. Remind Me itself is a fine sort of club single type track. The I Need Rock and Roll sample it's been done better on other tracks, and I don't know how necessary it was for this song, but it's fine. It's just not one of the stronger tracks. Then we get on to Like Home after the Revival interlude. Again, the sequencing of the album is a little bit bizarre. The interlude just kind of appears straight after a song which has had an intro, and we don't really get any of that further on in the album. But anyway, that's kind of off topic. Another political song featuring Alicia Keys, produced by Just Blaze. This time looking at the Trump administration and Trump as a president. And again, not a big fan of the president. But a nice anthemic, sort of patriotic kind of feeling track. So, yeah, strong overall. Bad Husband featuring ex-ambassadors. Produced by Alex the Kids, who produces a few other tracks on here as well. Looking at his relationship with Kim, and actually taking a more of a mature stance on his relationship and the mistakes they made with her, and that he could have been a better husband for her. Feeling that he was, a strong father, but not necessarily a good husband to hers. So, as a kind of overall apology for the ways that he's been towards her, it works. Perhaps a bit too late, but at least he got it out there, I suppose. And next, Tragic Endings with Skylar Grey. A song which kind of gets a bit lost in the shuffle of just another kind of messed up relationship song. Em and Skylar are great together, but their collaborations do tend to get a bit samey, and without anything to kind of really differentiate or punctuate them particularly, they just kind of get a bit lost. Framed or discussed. Nowhere Fast with Kalani is nice, youthful, exuberant chorus from Kalani. Kind of doesn't quite match with what M's going on about in his verses. He doesn't have much of a topic in particular, but it's certainly not quite what the feel of the chorus gives you, but it's still a good song. Very catchy and uplifting. Heat and Offended. Need Me with Pink. Again, Eminem and Pink are really good together. This song is kind of more Pink's song, though. M is really just a feature on the track. So from that aspect, while it's not a bad song, it feels a little bit pointless on here. It should have been on Pink's album instead. Anyway, In Your Heads um, goes by the Cranberries Zombie sample, which is cool to hear working with the zombie sample. Um, and yeah, even though the song is kind of again treading similar ground, it's nice to hear. Excuse me, going. It's to hear bringing that sample in with the Scram Jones production. It is kind of hard hitting in terms of production as well. So it's not maybe it gets cancelled out slightly by some of the other stuff on here, but it's still a decent song. Then we get Castle and A Rose, which are kind of like sister songs that work in conjunction with each other. Using Castle to kind of look at fictional letters he'd been writing to his daughter from a young age and just before his drug overdose, which is nice to hear him look, they discuss those issues. And then with A Rose, looking at himself after the overdose in hospital, on his deathbed essentially, and but eventually being able to pull through, then going back to the final verse of Castle and rewriting it to show him making it through and not succumbing to the overdose, which is a really nice twist. So I mean, both these songs together pretty much not save the album, but certainly boost it a lot for a very strong ending. So yeah, overall it's fine, and it's a fine album. There's certainly a lot of things on there that could have been taken off. Isn't really at that point in his career where he can do long albums anymore. And yeah, say some sequencing things as well, but it's fine altogether. So then we get followed up, number 8, with Kamikaze, the album which was released as a response to all the people that didn't like Revival. So Shock released 8 months after Revival was, and while it was really interesting to hear that album come out so quickly, and it was clear to see that M had kind of been revived, no pun intended, for this project. He's certainly sounded a lot hungrier and more aggressive on Kamikaze over in comparison to Revival. After the shock of the release, it didn't quite. Some of the stuff on there didn't quite land as well. On repeat listens. The opening sort of tracks, The Ringer and Greatest, kind of generally discuss his position in hip hop and the newer styles of hip hop, and not necessarily being a fan of the way that the hip hop music is going. Just where we kind of get some of the issues with this project. I mean, one, it's a short album at least, so at least it is kind of easy to get through. But it does mean that the stuff that isn't as strong, it means there isn't as many stronger tracks altogether. And the whole theme of discounting the newer generation of hip hop and the way that it's turned out, and how easy it is to do if you just go with a certain style and a certain beat, and replicating these beats and flows. quite frequently throughout the project doesn't really doesn't really make his points that well. And it just kind of more makes it more sound like he's trying to use those beats and flows to become more accessible to the newer generation. So it doesn't quite help his cause, but so that's kind of a major issue overall with the project. Um, Lucky You with Joyner Lucas is certainly a highlight of the album, and it's certainly a time where a newer artist actually does really light a fire for M's, very fast flow that he kind of tries to put on quite frequently, particularly in the latter stages of his career, actually works well on here with the very pacey Boy Wonder beat, and of course matching Joyner Lucas's flow. So being able to bounce off him in that way, works really well. Normal is just another one of M's relationship tracks about not be able to all the women that he finds are crazy and hard to deal with, and after enough of those it gets quite tiresome, because there's certainly not the last one we're going to be seeing throughout this video. We get Stepping Stone, which has M discussing his relationship with D12 and the fact that they kind of fell apart after the death of Proof, and the reason why they don't really do music anymore, and kind of putting a final ending on D12 as a whole, which it's a good song. Again, it sounds it sounds more like an older Eminem track, which kind of makes sense with it being an Eminem and Louis Resto produced song. It does beg the question why it took so long to officially say that D12 is finished when they hadn't really done anything substantial since Proof's murder 12 years before. Just making appearances every now and again, which frequently didn't have M's involvement, and then so it just if some of the sentiment is slightly weird on the track, but at least again M is kind of explaining what's happened with the group and giving a bit of a perspective about why things perhaps didn't pan out as well for them. Again, some of it is a bit backhanded, but I say the sentiment is overall it's good. It's good overall, and it's one of the better tracks on the album anyway. So not got too much problem with that. Then goes on to Not Alike, featuring Royce da 5'9", who has kind of taken over the position of D12 or Obi Trice or someone from the Shady label in a way, which at least he, with M having grown up with worked with Royce in Detroit in the same scene when they were coming up together, makes sense. Royce is obviously a great lyricist and has a great verse on here. M's verse is good as well, but it does kind of start to tamper off towards the end, and kind of like the second half of it with the beat switch it just goes on for quite a while until it gets a bit excessive. Obviously the most notable thing about this song is shots towards Machine Gun Kelly, which the initial actual this is at Machine Gun bring a sub with me and that kind of thing. It's like all that kind of works well, but that it just starts going on and on too far into the last stages of the verse. It just M just rambling essentially, which is again another issue with a lot of his later verses. So the song itself isn't bad, but it could have done with a lot of trimming down. There's another one of those songs. Another the recent habits of a song again trying to imitate a lot of the newer style of having a beat for the first half of a track and then switching it up for the second half of a track, which happens on a couple of the other songs on here as well. But I think Normal does it, from what I remember, to an extent. It's always after so many people, after it's been done so many times, it gets a bit redundant. The beats very rarely complement each other or make any sense together. But yeah, that's that. Obviously, a lot of the production on this album is provided by some a little more newer producers such as Ronnie J, Illa the producer, Mike Will made it, who have varying degrees of success in terms of beats on here. The Mike Will produced Fall is certainly one of his better produced songs, and again one of the stronger tracks on the album. Again, more known for its disses towards several other people, notably Tyler Creator and Joe Budden. There's also the section towards the end where M talks about his own influence on other artists, listing people such as Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Big Sean, Royce da 5'9", which is a bit of a weird addition considering they were Royce was influenced by M and vice versa, but they came up together, so it's a bit of a weird one to use, but it's nice to shout him out, giving more promotion on here. It's funny that a lot of the artists that he takes shots at on this album were also influenced by M, but he doesn't seem so keen on mentioning them in this bit. But yeah, it's a nice way of sort of showing just the influence that M has had overall, and that his place in hip hop is warranted. So before that, so the track, the title track Kamikaze, which has a nice little old school reference with the LL Cool J sample, where the title Kamikaze has come from, but it doesn't do a lot that isn't done particularly by the first few tracks on the album, so again it's a little bit redundant. After this we get the again kind of sister tracks of collaborations with Jesse Reyes, Nice Guy and Good Guy, it's that way round I believe. The Nice Guy is again another one of those relationship tracks which goes out to be to elaborate on the unpleasantness between the two parties, or just kind of general dickishness to each other, which M is kind of more well versed in than Jesse. So he pulls it off a lot more comfortably than she does. The song overall, I know it's kind of supposed to be about unpleasantness to each other, but it doesn't mean the song itself should be unpleasant to listen to, and it kind of is. The beat isn't particularly nice sounding, and the verses themselves are just kind of Good Guy is a lot stronger with nice smooth sample driven beats, again not a style we don't often get from M. And his verse is it's stronger overall. There's kind of a few weak lines in there. Jesse Rare's verse and chorus is also nice. They kind of have a bit more breathing space with their appearances on here, so they feel a bit more comfortable and more natural. Then we finish with the track Venom from the Venom film, which was released around the same time. A sort of strange album closer, but it makes for a good film track, and at least the song had a home on here. It doesn't feel too out of place or anything. So overall, after the initial shock factor of Kamikaze is worn off, only about half of it is actually worth listening to. But there's, just say not a lot is on here that is really bad. But the strong stuff is strong, and the weaker stuff is quite notable when you go through it. So at number 7, I go for Music to Be Murdered By. Stop trying to do things phone. So the most recent studio release from Eminem, released in January 2020. Went that long now. And so this is kind of a bit of a return to form for M in a way. There's more of an overall horrorcore theme to it. The album's inspired by older horror stuff, particularly Albert Hitchcock with his Music to Be Murdered By tape. Just to go back to some of the songs on this set of albums kind of feeling out of place. So Framed from the Revival album, which has more of a horrorcore style to it, could that have fitted better on this album? Maybe. Because while not all the songs on here are horrorcore or hardcore or whatever, there's certainly more of a feel of that overall. We also have more a return to production from Dr. Dre, who produces several tracks on this album with M and his list of producers, Mark Batson, DeWan Parker, Trevor Lawrence, Louis Resto, all kind of like come together for several tracks on this album, which also helps getting back to the older Eminem sound. Beginning with the chilling Premonition intro featuring Nicky Greer on the chorus, another Aftermath mainstay. Again, Eminem, looking at his place in hip hop, having a nice kind of moments of people complain about him being around for so long, but maybe not complain about other artists who have been around for a similar amount of time, like Jay-Z, Tech Nine, 2 Chainz, who hasn't really been around for as long, but okay. So it's cool to hear looking discussing that, and he sounds very strong over the track. Unaccommodating, which follows it, isn't quite as good. While it's interesting for the first proper vocals from an actual proper song on the album to be a young M.A., who we sort of referenced on Kamikaze. It's good to interesting to have a female rapper officially starting off the songs on the album, but it's not a particularly strong. And neither of the verses from her or M are particularly strong. There is a bit from M of kind of like trying to throw some shock value into his verse by mentioning the Manchester bombing, which the other day was the 50th anniversary. So when you take that into account, it happened like nearly 3 years before his album came out. So it's already out of date by that time anyway. So mention it on there, and I think he mentions it again later on the album as well. So yeah, falling a little bit for that trope of just mentioning controversial things for the sake of mentioning controversial things. But anyway, then you go and learn with Royce the 5'9", who actually produces the song as well as featuring. Royce produces a few of the tracks on this album. It's just nice to hear Royce starting to come into the production side of things a bit more. Of course, Em and Royce work well together, so there's decent enough collaboration between the pair of them. In terms of collaborations, we get a few familiar faces. Ed Sheeran appears for Those Kind of Nights, a nice kind of like party track, with Bizarre from D12 appearing for the intro as well, which is nice to hear. I say Em and Ed have fairly good chemistry. Maybe some of M's lines here aren't particularly strong in terms of their punchlines, but it's a fine song overall. One of the stronger collaborations on the album comes about midway on the album with the Mr. Porter produced Ya Ya, which features Royce again, as well as Q-Tip on the chorus and Black Thought. Now, I mean, particularly Black Thought's verse is really. I mean, Black Thought is a great lyricist, and he really gets to showcase that here, which is great to hear on an M album, that he's able to sort of bring on a really strong old school lyricist, someone from outside his own camp. It's a great collaboration overall. It has a very strong old school feel. M has one of his better verses on here to compete with Black Thought. Juice WRLD appears posthumously for the chorus of Godzilla, like the lead single from the album. His chorus is fine. The song itself is also kind of fine. I mean, M has one of his moments towards the end where he decides to just start speed rapping for no reason. It doesn't. Sometimes it just kind of feels a bit out of place. I get Darkness, which is one of the more a lot more emotional kind of tracks, looking at him, looking at the parallels of Eminem as an artist, dealing with his addictions, and the Las Vegas murder from 2017. And while maybe there's maybe the parallels and comparisons don't mesh together quite so well. There's some good double meanings, some good metaphors that M manages to utilize on here, and the overall sort of message of being anti-gun violence and looking into mental health issues, for the reasons why people do commit certain atrocities, without perhaps being looked out for or anything like that. It's a very strong message overall. With the video to help relay that as well. So for a track so late in M's career to be as strong as this, again, perhaps the messages of anti-gun violence could have been addressed earlier in his career, but it's still good to be able to hear something like that being used now. Um, Stepdad, we're produced by Alchemist. Another one of M's kind of fantasy kind of tracks of looking at the relationship between a stepdad. I'm not sure if like the stepdad who gets mentioned on this track is the same stepdad who's kind of been referred to in other tracks in a similar manner. Um, but still, it's a very sort of old school Eminem sound. Um, with his kind of storytelling, fantasy, uh, murderous kind of track. Justifiably so in terms of like the material which is mentioned. Um, yeah, it's only again one of the stronger tracks on the album. They're kind of like that middle section with Darkness, Yaya, Stepdad, where we kind of get some of the stronger tracks overall. It feels. Not long after that, we get the kind of a bit more of the Dr. Dre produced section of the album with Never Love Again. Again, a nice metaphor track about his previous addictions, even though that's a topic which has kind of been addressed quite a bit by at this point. It even ends with the flushing of the drugs down the toilet, which is how Rose finished on Revival. It's still a well produced song. Obviously M sounds really good over Dre beats. Little Engine is a much more frenetic sounding track where M lyrically just really does start to go off. Bringing his just quick rhymes and strong rhymes and that kind of thing. So it's again a nice short track, but still a strong one overall. Lock It Up with Anderson .Paak, which is kind of stronger for the Anderson .Paak feature than M, but it's cool to hear the two of them collaborating together. Some of the tracks after this kind of do start to drag a little bit and aren't as strong overall. So like Farewell is just kind of a bit there. No Regrets with Don Toliver on the chorus is Don Toliver isn't a great chorus. Well, certainly not for the style of choruses that work on M's tracks. I mean, he's not too bad on here because it's just that's all he appears for. But yeah, the song overall isn't particularly strong. And then we do pick up a bit later for the closer, the Slaughterhouse featuring I Will, featuring Royce 5'9" again with Joe Ortiz and Crooked Eye. So not the full Slaughterhouse due to the issues that M had with Joe Budden, but still a really good strong closer with all four of the artists having strong verses, and the Slaughterhouse have very good chemistry together, and M works well with Royce and subsequently does fit in well with the other Slaughterhouse members. So again, the strong tracks on here are very strong. The weak tracks do drag a bit, and there's arguments that some of the songs could have been swapped around a bit on this set of albums to make the overall themes of the albums match more. So Music Be Murdered by having the more horrorcore style tracks, Revival having the more serious tracks, and Kamikaze having, I guess, the more like aggressive sounds without delving too far into the horrorcore stuff. if those albums had been, yeah, if the tracks had been separated more in that way, they could have possibly all worked out better, and you know, it would have been a better balance of tracks maybe, and so the albums would have been stronger overall, perhaps. But yeah, out of all of them, Music Be Murdered By does kind of feel the strongest collection of them. Let's say with it being more closer to the kind of closest we're going to get to the old, late 90s, early 2000s Eminem style that we're going to get, because you can't completely go back to that kind of style now. So this is certainly as close as we'll get, and it does generally pay off all in all. So yeah, great album. Side B didn't happen. So number 6 we have Marshall Mathers LP 2, released in November 2013 as the sequel to the famous Marshall Mathers LP. There is so a lot of this album does have references to not only the Marshall Mathers LP, but certainly the other stuff around that sort of time. Of the first few albums of his career, his mainstream career. With it being kind of this where Rick Rubin kind of first comes in and helps with a lot of the production on here. So the executive producer role, which is generally taken by Dr. Dre, is shared between Dre and Rick Rubin. And Rick actually does produce on here, and Dre doesn't, I think, have any production on here unless he produces an intro or something like that. But it's basically Rick Rubin, Alex the Kid, Em and Lou Resto. So overall, it's still fairly in-house and or producing with familiar producers. So the overall sound of it does kind of harken back somewhat to M's older stuff, with still having a contemporary kind of sound to it. We begin with Bad Guy, the sequel to Stan, looking at it from years later, where Stan's little brother is now grown up and is taking out his frustrations on Eminem. A really well told story. This is one of the only times where the changes in beats really works, because the first sort of bit of the song with Matthew finding Eminem, as a very nice kind of like simplistic track to it, to allow the story to be told over with Eminem. But then once the kind of main it starts to build up later in the latter third of the track, it becomes a lot more hard hitting and powerful, and M starts looking more at his own mentality, having his arguments with his own mindset about how long he's been in the game for, and whether he still has what it takes, and whether he should give up, which, I mean, that's a discussion for another day perhaps, but it's still a really, really, really strong opener. We have the parking lot skit, which references to the end of the original Marshall Mathers LP. It's a good way to kind of lead off from there and go into this project. Rhyme or Reason, very a decent after a track after that. So Much Better, another one of M's mad women songs. There's some cool lines in there, but it's not particularly strong overall. Survival, a nice hard hitting DJ Khalil produced song, perhaps a bit similar to some of their older collaborations, but still a strong, hard hitting track overall. Um, Legacy, a very more of a kind of nostalgic kind of track. Again, looking at as a younger person having to deal with bullies, and how he sort of grown up to be able to use that anger against to fight back. Um, the third verse does go on a little bit into just American football punchlines, but the song overall is strong. Um, Arsehole featuring Skylar Grey. Again, the song itself is a decent look at and his persona and his and kind of perceived unpleasantness because of the persona that he puts out and this kind of thing. But the verses do go on, particularly towards the end, and this is a bit of a running theme throughout the album. I feel as that a lot of these songs could have been edited down. This is like M has a bit of a tendency to feel like he has to keep going on his verses to make them more epic. But actually, if they got cut down a lot, they would have been a lot stronger. I mean, there's an argument that any verse can be cut down by at least 8 bars, and I include 8-bar verses. And certainly a lot of these songs, like the third verses could have just been halved, and they would have been a lot easier to take in and digest. But apart from that, the song's fine. Berserk, the lead single, a nice kind of old school, really old school sounding track, with a kind of like 80s hip hop sounds to it, sampling Billy Squire. As what Rick Rubin really helps out with the production and bring in that old school feel to the track. A lot different to a lot of M's other, even though it's kind of like got a bit of a comedic style to it. It's certainly a lot different from a lot of M's other singles. So yes, a strong lead single. Rap God. Yeah. So basically, the reason why people love Rap God is because of the speed rapping part of it, which is about like 20 seconds of a 6-minute song. So basically, people like this song for like 6% of it. And I remember what the actual maths is behind it. It's 1/18th, which I think is that 6%. It's certainly a very low percentage. There's just a way of illustrating how overrated this song is. It's again, M just deciding to do a long song for the sake of doing a long song. The old references to bits of the Marshall Mathers LP, the 6 minutes Slim Shady are on, to go for the reason why this song has to be 6 bloody minutes. I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. Brainless is a lot better. Again, another one of the kind of old school feeling M songs in terms of like a kind of a fantasy telling of himself as a child, fighting back against the people, the bullies that were against him, all this kind of thing. Stronger Than I Was, which has more of a singing song. And I mean, M isn't necessarily the a great singer, but he can sort of hold his own notes on here, and sound fairly good on the track. Um, a bit of a debate about what the song is actually about. It certainly feels like it's supposed to be about his relationship with Kim, whether it's actually more from her perspective, which again is, if that is the case, is a very mature take on their relationship. And it's a strong track overall. The Monster featuring Rihanna is again a look at M and the influence that he's had, and discussing his own sort of inner struggles and that kind of thing. M and Rihanna haven't necessarily had the greatest chemistry. I don't, even though they collaborated a lot, they still kind of feel a little bit weird as a collaborative duo. But they still both sound good on here, and it's a decent single. Sounds good overall, and particularly with the rest of the tracks on the album, it does kind of fit the feel a bit. So far, nice look at M in the present day, dealing with fame and new technology, and the way music is now being consumed. What the newer fan base feels about him. And again, another nice old school sounding, or more of a country-ish sounding track. Love Game with Kendrick Lamar. Strong collaboration between the pair of them. More of a comedic, mad relationship track again, but at least it's a collaboration with Kendrick, so it plays off really well, and they both have strong verses on here. Headlights featuring Nate Roos with looking at his mother, and again kind of like apologising to his mother for the way he's acted towards her in the past. Which, I mean, again, you can perhaps look at how some of maybe that's another debate about whether the behaviours towards each other was justified or not. But again, at least M is mature enough to kind of look past it and apologise on here, and then finishing with Evil Twin. Another way to ends the album with kind of more of a menacing kind of track. Fine. That's the way it wants to end. That's cool. Overall, it's fine track. We do also have some bonus tracks on this version of the album. None of them are necessarily missing from the overall album, but there's still a decent selection of tracks. Baby is a nice strong Dre sounding beat in a way, which cool to see M being able to develop that kind of style in his production. Desperation, decent collaboration with Jamie Commons. Groundhog Day, again, a bit of more of a not nostalgia track, looking back at things. Beautiful Pain features Sia. The stronger of all these bonus tracks has more of a uplifting kind of feel to it. And Wicked Ways, which features ex-ambassadors, I believe, and then leads into a Ken Kniff skit as a way to bring the Ken Kniff character back. Again, as a way of kind of closing things off, it's fine. Overall, the album, it does have a good some good callbacks to the older material and juxtaposing that with the way that M's outlook on life is now. But it certainly could have been cut, but yeah, particularly in terms of the verses and the lyrics, it should have been cut down quite a bit, and some of the songs would have been a lot easier to digest if the verses were shorter. Um, but yeah, that's it for the first half of the Eminem uh, album rankings. It's a lot to go through and digest with these M albums, so it's going to take a bit of a while. But I just managed to get through that first half relatively painlessly, and we'll see you soon for the top five. See you then.